Welcome to the second AEDE podcast. It's on building and dwelling. Today we have an exciting theme and we have already feel that there's so much to talk about this topic. And with me is host Nada and host Kelsey.
Hi everyone.
Hi everyone.
Before we begin, we would like to give acknowledgement to the land that we are currently doing our broadcast. CJSW Radio broadcasts out of Mockinsis, Calgary at the University of Calgary campus radio station located on Treaty 7 land. CJSW would like to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bass Paw, and Wesley First Nation. The city of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. CJSW would also like to note that the University of Calgary is situated on land adjacent to where the Bow River meets the Elbow River, and that the traditional Blackfoot name of this place is Mockinsis, which we now call the city of Calgary. We begin with a reading of an article taken from Field Notes, Homegrown Justice in a Legacy City by Karen Freeman Wilson. Nada, you have reviewed the article, and what do you take away from that article?
Yeah, so something interesting that was mentioned in this article is that Gary, Indiana was once nicknamed Magic City because of its economic population and educational growth as well as its architectural innovation. However, 70 years later, it received a massive decline in population, leaving many homes empty and a growing poverty and unemployment rate. I wanted to ask Vincent and Kelsey, what do you guys think about this, and do you see any relation to Calgary?
Yeah, I really think that, Calgary Alberta really as the kind of oil capital of Canada, many people came to Alberta to kind of tap into our wealth in the oil industry. But since oil has now become there's just been a downturn in the oil industry recently, and especially with the COVID-19 pandemic, there have been so many more office buildings left empty, people, without jobs. And so I guess in that sense, we are very similar to Gary, Indiana, where lots of people have left trying to find jobs elsewhere. Lots of people are still here, but are still unemployed or can't find a job in their field.
Yeah, I agree fully with Kelsey's analogy of the way she's seen Calgary over the last at least 6-7 years since 2014. But what is interesting is that I think what I take away from Karen Freeman Wilson's article is that we need to take ownership to rebuild its glorious years. Though people may come and go from our city, but I think Calgarian, we are very resilient people and we are strong. All of us, the young generation here, we need to rebuild the glorious years as suggested by Karen Freeman Wilson, and it must begin from us. We need to plan, just as designers and in AEDE planners, we need to plan so that we can really pass something on to the next generation. It is interesting to see how we see the building and housing issue in Calgary. I mean, especially building, talking about taking ownership. The Calgary community have to take ownership. First thing I think about is about the building and housing in Calgary, and which is very related to the theme. I think there is a lot of rebuilding and rethinking of the housing and building issues here in Calgary.
I mean, yeah, is housing a basic human necessity? We consider clean water, food, education, and healthier basic necessity, but is housing something that we should be considering?
Yeah, I mean, in North America, housing is always thought of as an investment, not much so a human right, but it is part of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So the United Nations Human Rights, the UNHR, under the UN Habitat has a whole fact sheet on the issue of adequate housing. Adequate housing was recognized as a human right based on the standard of living in the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So it is clearly recognized as a human right.
Yeah, I had a look at the article and it was interesting in the introduction. I think everybody should have a look at the report, to understand really about adequate housing. And it talks about international human rights law recognizes everyone's right to an adequate standard of living. including adequate housing. Despite the central place of this right within the global legal system, well, over 1 billion people are not adequate housed. Over 1 billion people, this is surprising. Millions around the world live in life or health-threatening conditions, in overcrowded slums and informal settlements, or in other conditions which do not uphold their human rights and their dignity. I think it really spells out it's just not the four walls of house. You need to have a dwelling and a home. Further, millions are forcibly evicted or threatened with forced eviction from their homes every year. That's very, very interesting.
Now that we know that the UN considers housing, and not just like basic housing, but actually adequate housing as a basic human right, let's see about how Canada, or even if Canada has adopted these standards like we have with climate change. I did some research, and Maloon Kothari, who was a special reporter on adequate housing at the time, he visited Canada in 2007.
2007, eh?
Yeah, it's quite some time ago. But in his final report, he called for Canada to adopt a comprehensive and coordinated national housing policy based on the indivisibility of human rights and the protection of the most vulnerable. So he said that this national strategy should include measurable goals and timetables, consultation and collaboration with the affected communities. He had complaint procedures and transparent accountability mechanisms. And he also noted, which I found very interesting, that Canada is one of the few countries that doesn't have a national housing strategy.
I hope so. They have it now, because that was back in 2007.
Did you guys know that the current special rapporteur on adequate housing is Leilani Farha? So she is, trying to combat the issue of inadequate housing, and she recently produced a documentary called The Push, which we will discuss later.
Yeah, I think she's also the executive director for Canada Without Poverty in Canada.
Yeah.
She's really a fighter for adequate housing over in Canada. So this means that there's not a direct manner of enforcing the right of adequate housing so far under the human rights law in the Canadian domestic court system. That's pretty interesting, eh?
Yeah, well, most recently, on November 22nd in 2017, which was just 3 years ago, the government announced Canada's first ever national housing strategy, which is a 10-year $40 billion plan to help reduce homelessness and improve the affordability, availability, and the quality of housing for all our Canadians in need.
Oh, that's good. That's interesting. In 2017.
So it only took 10 years. Yeah, it only took 10 years for us to implement a plan.
But it'll be interesting to let you know, in 2008, we'll discuss that further down the road. Calgary has a 10-year end homeless plan. That was a report. We will look at it later. But now let's refocus our thoughts on how building and housing in Calgary itself. Do you know that there's a spectrum in terms of housing in Calgary? So at the right beginning of the end of it is the social housing. Then we have the affordable housing, where it's divided into the non-market and market rental affordable housing. And then we can go into the market and the rental of housing, as well as we will go also into the commercial and office building in downtown. So let's talk about the issues of housing and buildings in Calgary.
So looking at actual statistics from Avison Young about the office spaces in our downtown area in Calgary, there are actual indicators that we are going through a recession, and we're going to look at how our economy, I suppose, and the oil industry actually affects the spaces that we inhabit in our downtown area, so like our office buildings. So from this chart from Avison Young, looking at the historical price of oil and the relationship with that between our downtown office vacancy rates. In 2010, we had oil at around $75 to $80 per barrel, and our vacancy rates were at around 10% of all office spaces. But then when you go forward to 2019, oil is at $50 per barrel, and that vacancy rate rises up to 25%. So you can see that when oil goes lower, more office space is open because less people can afford to hold up and actually rent out these spaces or, tenant them.
At least we can see from the chart there's really a inverse relationship between these two. When oil goes down and vacancy rates goes up.
Yep. And then absorption, which is basically the amount of space, square footage of space that is tenanted minus the square space that is vacant, I guess, in a period of time. Once that number goes down, so once it goes into the negatives, that's when you see more of like a recession time, more of a recession like economic period. That's when you know that the city or the area that you're inhabiting is not necessarily in trouble, but not doing so great.
So there is indeed a really short of tenants for there's a lot of vacancy, right?
Yeah, lots of vacancies. Lots of vacancies are definitely related to how low our oil prices can get.
I think there's an important need for planners and designing, reshaping the future of Calgary, especially all these vacant spaces that we have. How do we use these spaces in the future to readapt, to renew the spaces? We've got to be thinking about the community. I think community should be the center with all these empty spaces, and we've got to be definitely optimistic by taking hold of this. I think we go back to Karen Freeman's article again.
Yeah.
Let's look about the housing for rental and affordable housing.
So looking at the graphs from the Canadian Housing Mortgage Corporation, in 2000, there was a high vacancy rate of about 7%. So this average trend keeps on rising. However, there is still a shortage in affordable rental housing. There is more demand, but not enough availability. However, if you look at the rental, it is a steady rise, irregardless of the economy. So if the economy really has no effect on the rental.
That's interesting. So there's a lot of vacancy that people need the house. There's not enough of a vacancy of available housing, and yet the rental is up. Wow, this really indicates the shortage. But having said that, I think we should look. Do you know that the city of Calgary has got the foundations for home corporate affordable housing strategy 2016 to 2025? There's a lot of demographics inside it that shows the seriousness of the shortage of affordable housing in Calgary. Over the next 10 years, if we don't address the shortage and get more affordable houses into the market, we definitely will have a crisis. So we can see the affordable housing and commercial building scenario in Calgary doesn't look good, but definitely is where we really have to take hold of it and do something about it. Let's move into the next thing about housing and dwelling, which is housing using modular. This is one of the top popular research areas, modular housing. How do you guys think about modular housing?
So my experience with modular housing is there's actually like a little modular home setup in my neighborhood on the end of a block. It's just set on a corner. It's about 3 kind of modules of 8 homes stacked upon each other. So there's 4 on the bottom, 4 on the top kind of setup. And I find that it's just a really easy way to get a lot of people a home very fast, very efficiently, and get a lot of people in one place.
Yep. So usually, as what Kelsey has mentioned, modular home, it came about especially even in developing countries where you need to provide mass houses for a lot of people when there's a need to curb the shortage. So modular housing means like it's a bit like Lego, you prefab everything is controlled. One thing the way they commercialize it is that you can control the quality, and you build it very fast because it's stacked on top one another. Sometimes they even modular means prefab the walls and you come and assemble them together. So there are many stages of modular housing. But I think that there need to be more than just the commercial and the speed in modular housing, because we need to talk about, like, you can't say like what Kelsey said, everybody looks the same and all this. And I think we had a symposium in School of Architecture where you can do little things on the facade of affordable housing and make it look good. So what I think that is important is the stakeholder and people who live there, which goes back to our topic again. It's just not 4 walls and a home. Modular gives you that feeling. You try to uniform a soldier barrack or something like that. But it is beyond that. I think even if we do modular, every project, we need to create an identity and a community to support it, even though it's mass housing.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think this leads us into the next topic, which is, housing for who?
Social housing is on the lowest end of the spectrum of housing in Calgary, which is fully funded by the government. Do you guys think social housing is effective in Calgary in resolving the issue of homelessness?
I would say so. It helps get people off the street.
Yeah, I think so also. But if you go downtown, there's still a lot of homelessness, and I think it's a holistic approach to this social housing thing, which I think the city of Calgary, you'll be surprised, in 2008, they actually have a Calgary 10-year plan to end homelessness. And it just ended in 2018. I don't know if you know that. There's a full report on it. So if you think about city of Calgary, I think they are really on to it. They have a foundation for homes for affordable rental housing. They have plans for 10-year plan since 2008, which ended just recently in 2018 to end homelessness. So we have learned that the housing first does not equal to housing only. And to end homelessness doesn't mean just, having social housing. There are many people may be required to wrap around the support to help them to be successful and all these projects to be successful. So after the 2018 End Homelessness report, we had the City of Calgary came together to 6 strategic directives. And one of the 2 that are really interesting was this. The first one was people first. This is about living experience, our frontline staff, and our commitment to truth and reconciliation. And 2, a home for everyone. This is about housing first and a healthy, affordable, and supportive housing continuum, which means it is a holistic approach. It's just not the 4 walls as we mentioned again. It's just not building, but it's about dwelling and calling a place a home.
It's thinking more about the people who are living inside the home, not just building it.
Yeah.
How about as designers? How can we make that 4 walls become more like a home?
So traditionally, people expect well-designed buildings to be costly, luxurious, tall, pretty, just from the outside, looking at it from the outside. But design really goes past all of that. And it goes past including the function and the story behind it and how it makes people feel.
There's a lot more to design than just how it looks or what it's made of. It could be a 10-foot marble building, but it could still make you feel, really outcast. Or, it could also be really impeding in the history and the land of where it is. You have to really think about kind of the people who live there and the community that building is going to be set in.
Of course, yeah. And it's all really how it makes the people feel, kind of making it feel like a sanctuary to some people, making it feel like it's home or making them feel safe in a way. So
as much as you want maybe your home to look nice, you do want it to feel more like a home than anything.
Yeah.
So, after going through all this, so what does actually a good designer, how do you put a good designer? If it's not about the aesthetics, it's not about the internal form, which is a well debatable stuff.
I think that a good designer, although sure you can include aesthetics and, form and function into one thing, more than anything, you have to accomplish something that people want to go to and people want to be in, especially if it's a home, you want to be home.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
What do you think of the recent trends like sustainable, environmental friendly, and the use of even smart city? Actually, smart city means technology, but all I know, there's smart growth cities. You have 10 points of smart growth cities. Go and look into it. But all these things are new things that come into design, and it's very important. I'm not saying that it's not important. It's very important. But at the same time, I think it goes back to the important day of the question of the theme again. The building for who?
Yeah, you can include, like, I think sustainability is very important, especially with some environmental issues that we have going on in the world, especially with climate change. Thinking about building homes that will support the people living in it, but also the environment it's in. They're very important. Yeah.
Sorry, I think it's about meeting the needs of the people now without jeopardizing, the future generations.
Future, yes, exactly.
So it's a sustainable that's really sustainable for the future. Where people are in it and it's really for the people. Even technology, sometimes I think when we think about technology, it really must be beneficial to the people, not just that we are all high tech and stuff like that.
So have you guys heard of tactical urbanism?
No, I haven't before.
No, neither. I mean, I've heard of it, but it sounds more like a war strategy, like call where you go to the duty of call or something like that.
I mean, tactical urbanism in simple terms is, these small scale, affordable and well thought out solutions to change an urban public space for the better, to make the space more lively. A great example of tactical urbanism would be the alley Oop in downtown Vancouver. So they took this desolate, dark alley and they completely transformed it and created this vibrant, lively space. And now it's like an icon. People come there all the time and people come to socialize or just have fun. So, I mean, you can see how much tactical urbanism is just a great way to completely transform a space.
I see all this also around Beltline where they draw the murals, and even in our SAPL they find little alleys like the green alley. They do that. That's interesting. Actually, but I didn't know it's called a
tactical urbanism.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. In every development and projects that we do, we really need to bring the people in, because at the end of the day, in order to make something, a dwelling, really a home or a project that people feel, the important thing is to discuss with the community.
Yeah, community engagement is really important, especially when you're building a home, especially because you want it to be something that everyone feels comfortable in. You want a building in a community to be something that doesn't stick out in a bad way, but maybe sticks out in a good way. So taking from our field theories, we had various industry professionals talk about building and creating within their communities. The general themes that I took away from that were learning from their mistakes and, most importantly, listening and talking to those who were inhabiting the space and accepting failure. So, talking to the people that were there, learning from what they needed and what they wanted. A really great example of this is the Calgary Community Fridge, which was started by Megan Kirk, or Jane Trash is her artist name. It really shows that community change begins in our own communities. So, I mean, when the fridge first kind of was built, or that area where the fridge is located was built, I saw a lot of my friends kind of engaging with it, even if they didn't necessarily live in the community that it was in. It was a really positive thing to see lots of people from all over the city just engaging with that. And the fridge itself is something that supports those in the community. It helped build the community together instead of building against the community and the people that were in it. So I think that example is really important because it relates back to tactical urbanism, where we take these spaces and, make them better, build them for the community.
Okay, so I think if you want to know more about what was discussed, go to the field theories. It's in our AEDE YouTube, where our podcast and our field theories videos are there. It was indeed a good discussion on community engagement, and I think community engagement, not just buildings, but what the community wants to support. For example, the parks, the community centers, the good schools, and all these can only really be effective if it is done through community engagement. Okay, we're going to move into another area which I think that's interesting for housing, especially in housing where developers are coming in. It's a community interest or profit vested interest. If you go around the world, instead of keeping people in the community, they start kicking those who doesn't fit in that particular neighborhood or district, all for the reason of profit. And this is very evidently shown in the documentary Push by our good director, Canada Without Poverty, Leilani Farha. So there is indeed some sort of disturbing, thoughts about this. So what are your thoughts?
As she is actually the current special rapporteur on adequate housing for the UN. The documentary really highlights the conflict between human rights and the want or desire for profits in the housing realm. And again, like you said, it's all over the world, not just in Calgary.
I'd be surprised it's even in Europe, as Nada found out, the OECD YouTube.
Yeah, they were mentioning that it's all everywhere in the world, really. It's not just limited and they were mentioning how it's in Europe specifically.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder how can you have a just cities if everybody, you kick and put them at the peripheral, and where are they, especially even in Philippines, I've seen before, you put them in slums and you move them off the main city to the peripheral of the city, This is really sad. This is where I think Leilani's Push documentary is really showing us the reality of what is happening, in the world. It's just not in North America, but all over the world.
So we have touched on the different issues surrounding building and dwelling, from affordable housing to sustainability to design. So we hope that this podcast has given you some food for thought. AEDE has a lot of resources on the website, aede.ca, that talks about these issues. So we do acknowledge that there is a shortage of housing in Canada. Housing and building are not just four walls. It just goes beyond that. And it's about the people, the community, how you feel.
It's in fact a century, and I think somebody mentioned about century. And most important, I think we go back to saying that we as Calgarians, we should take ownership to rebuild Calgary. And there are many, many opportunities, whether you're a designer, a planner, and everybody should contribute. The next podcast will be really interesting, which is episode 3, Whose City?
Yeah.
Do we feel part of being a Calgarian in the city of Calgary? See you in the next episode.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.